All right, so welcome to the first FNC Coaches Roundtable. This is where we're just going to discuss a popular topic in nutrition or anything that kind of pops up. And this first week, we're going to be talking about snacks. So snack is something we get asked about a lot in our coaching sessions or even on Instagram. What's a healthy snack? And I think there's plenty of avenues that we can explore. I guess the topic of snacks today. So we're all just going to kind of share our thoughts or our views on snacks and even like little subheadings on snacks as well. So I guess we might go around first and like actually define like what actually is a snack. Anyone?
I guess I'll start then. Okay, so if you were to ask me what is a snack, I would say it's a small calorie containing feeding that usually goes in between main meals. And the typical times that you'd see people have snacks would say be, mid-morning between breakfast and lunch, and then mid-afternoon. That's the typical way I would sort of define a snack.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable working definition. I think there is, and I suppose this is something we can talk about, right? But some people have a tendency to really make that a small feeding, whereas there's other people who sort of approach the snacks almost like meals 4 and 5, of the day.
Maybe another way we could, sorry, Alex, you go, mate.
That's right. No, I was just going to say, I can't really type Mac's definition there. But I love what Tommy said about how, I guess, with some people, subjectively and objectively, the snacks go between meals and are subjectively and objectively smaller than their main meals. That's how you can differentiate between a meal and a snack. But it's important what Tommy said as well with some people, for example, with athletes, they may need to literally have meals in between their quote unquote meals to be able to fit in the energy that they're required to eat. So it's hard to define it objectively in like a really general way, but subjectively, they're just meals or boluses that go between main meals. Yeah, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah, so it basically goes in between a meal, and I think like you said, it's very hard to define. Objectively, it's this many calories. But I think that's a bit of an area where we do see a bit of a problem is people go small feeding, and obviously it's very goal dependent, which we can explore maybe next. But some people go, okay, small feeding, but if they don't understand the calorie content of certain foods, that snack, that small snack in volume could be quite calorie dense. It could be even more than a meal.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to add to that too, and probably linking in with that idea of managing calories, is I think for a lot of people, there's an increased level of spontaneity around their snacking compared to their fixed meals. So like I know for most of my clients, I tend to see relatively consistent feedings in the form of like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then where a lot of people start seeing some more changes or some less regularity rather, is like the total number of snacks, how much is in a snack, what's around them. I think they're more prone to have those external factors and their environment change how they're snacking too.
Do you think that's because there's less purpose behind it? Like there's structure, like your purpose with breakfast, lunch, and dinner is almost to satisfy hunger, right? But with the snack, sometimes there's a bit of it, like it's a bit ambiguous in regards to sometimes why someone's having a snack. Either they're doing it out of habit, they think they have to. Do they even know if they're hungry or bored or stressed or procrastinating?
Yeah, I really like the concept of purpose there, because there's a difference between someone who is emotionally eating at snack times, someone who is a grazer, for example. It's a different kind of snacking, if you like, versus like a well-intentioned, planned, nutritious snack between meals to meet requirements and or to satisfy appetite to prevent overeating at meal times. So I like what you said there about purpose, like the purpose and the intention behind a snack.
Yeah, and that's something when my clients say, oh, I want to work on my snacks or I need ideas for healthy snacks, the first question before I even give an option is like, okay, why are you snacking?
I think another way we can approach this is like the question that everyone's probably thinking who's watching this: are snacks bad? Are they good or bad?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
like a lot of things in nutrition,
Depends.
it sort of depends on the context and the situation. But one thing I have noticed is that people automatically view snacks as a negative thing. Like it's always like, oh, I've got to cut down on the snacking. I've got to like be careful. My snacking is the issue. And like it can be a big barrier to people achieving a certain, especially a calorie conscious goal, because like all of you guys said, people can graze, and main meals tend to be more thought out, more considered. They're typically better planned, and they're just more like established, whereas snacks have a greater propensity to just be kind of random and sporadic. And typically when we think about snack, we think about something that's really convenient, and that's often like a zero cook thing, something that doesn't really require preparation. And when we think about foods that don't require preparation, they're typically the very palatable, so delicious in layman's terms, the very calorie dense sort of things that are easy to eat a lot of. And when we do eat them, we eat a lot of calories. So, and it's sort of like if we have that sort of gray zone where we could snack, that basically opens the floodgates to potential of grazing. So I think that kind of there is a lot of rationale to saying, oh, I'm going to cut down on my snacks, or I'm just going to focus on main meals. But then the drawback to doing that is that if you go too long without having a feeding, when you know that ravenous hunger might build up, and that could be problematic in terms of, say, oh, it's been 7 hours since I had lunch and I haven't had a snack. I'm now preparing dinner, but I'm so hungry that I'm like snacking on things while I'm cooking. And then the other negative to like an anti-snack approach would be, well, like Alex said, like athletes and people with high energy demands, like you kind of need every opportunity you can get in a day to eat enough calories. So like there's not really, in short, like there's not really a snacking is good or bad, but it has the potential to really be a problematic thing. But in other instances, it can also be needed to ensure sufficient adherence for a given goal.
Yeah, that's why I'm actually really quite glad that Alex has turned up today as well, because the structure of like, you know, 3 mains and 3 snacks is really big in the like overcoming like binge eating and disordered eating space as well. So I guess do you want to I guess expand on that too?
Yeah, it's huge. So if we're using the Raves model approach to approaching any form of quote unquote healthy eating goal, let alone a specific eating disorder population, the foundation to any quote unquote healthy eating, normal healthy eating pattern is regular eating. And obviously long term, 3 meals, depending on objectively how much food is in each sitting, 3 meals and 3 snacks in the long term may be quote unquote too much food for someone. But when someone is recovering from an eating disorder, they are so out of tune with their hunger fullness signals that they don't know how to eat intuitively. That it'd be a disaster if they try to eat intuitively. So for someone with disordered eating or an eating disorder, telling them to just listen to their bodies is a disaster waiting to happen. They need to spend some time eating by the clock and eating every 3 hours to not only give their bodies what they need, but to sort of recalibrate their hunger fullness signals. So if we're looking at a restrictive eating disorder population, so like anorexia nervosa, where they are starved, then eating regularly without even looking at what they're eating yet, just eating regularly is probably going to be more than what they are currently eating anyway, so they can start rehabilitating. But also they can get used to the regular pattern of, all right, a few hours have passed, I need to start eating again now. But then if you compare it to, say, a binge eating population, where they probably are going through some form of dietary restraints, where they're trying to restrict what they're having. I just need to stop snacking so much. I'm not allowed to eat this anymore. Once you start implementing a regular eating pattern again, it sort of almost eliminates that physical deprivation side of things. The emotional deprivation is still there. That's another thing to work on. But if they're eating regularly, they're probably not going to be physically deprived of nutrition. So they won't be physically, the physical trigger of a binge won't be there anymore. So long story short, the regular eating pattern, rule of 3s, 3 meals, 3 snacks, 3 hours apart, is like a baseline foundation, like the concrete slab for the house, if you like, for most eating disorder recovery journeys.
Yeah. And on that too, I think even if you want to extrapolate some of those ideas across to like a non-clinical context, I think snacking can also really allow people opportunity to engage in like some of those ideas in intuitive eating of like honoring your hunger, trying to understand what's actually driving it, appreciating and like savoring your food, and doing all those kind of things. Because I think for a lot of us, our hunger responses around main meals are pretty learnt. Like, you get really hungry in that half hour before lunch, but if lunch is an hour later today for some reason, you might even find your hunger drops off a bit because your body's just used to eating at that time. Whereas with the snack, I think it gives you a really good chance for some reflection and to sit down and go, okay, like what is the hunger here for? Is it because I don't have enough calories? Is it because I want something sweet to taste? And then using that insight to then arrive at the best resolution of what you actually need in that moment.
Yeah, I like that, tapping into like your internal cues, and like you said, honoring it. It's really big on the intuitive eating space. It's like one of the core principles there. And I think it all comes back to that purpose of like what are you looking for from this snack, and what do you feel like you need, and also what do you want?
I think one really good point that was raised, I just want to sort of glance over again by all of you guys again, was the one big pro of regular eating patterns, which includes, say, a snack. So you are eating, say, every 3 hours and following sort of that concrete slab, like Alex was saying, is that it sort of negates that big peak and trough sort of thing in terms of hunger and fullness. So like if you go without a snack, and as I said, it's like 7 hours, your hunger is going to be quite high. And that could be problematic in terms of like sort of like a binge restrict cycle almost. So, I'm going to restrict. It's like for binge eating, it's like, I'm going to restrict. I'm not going to eat very much. And then hunger is just so great that you just end up just going to town, and it's really mindless eating. It's not thought out. It's not well considered. And that's when like the calories that you save by not having a snack, just like basically you just counteract that plus some more. So I think just for keeping hunger levels kind of within an ideal range, and not letting them go out of that range, I think having more regular feedings can really help with that side of things, and play a large role in preventing that sort of thoughtless eating.
Yeah, and it might also get like, let's say for example, we use the lunch at 12, the dinner at 7, and they haven't had a snack in between. They're absolutely ravenous. Nothing they have at dinner may hit the spot. So they're looking for ice cream, and they're looking for lots of ice cream to hit that spot. And still then it may not hit it. Whereas if they were more proactive, had that snack at like 3 or 4 o'clock, they may feel just as satisfied on dinner without having to look for more.
Yeah, I think another way we can actually approach that whole thing that you mentioned there, like let's say someone's going out to dinner and they have their lunch. If they have a snack at say 4 p.m. before their like 6 p.m. dinner, then coming into that dinner, they're not going to be so hungry. So they're more likely to sort of, eat mindfully, not eat super fast, not woof it down, and therefore be better positioned to make conscious choices. Because, we all know that social meals are certainly a tricky thing to navigate if the goal is to be calorie conscious, just due to the nature of those meals. So having that smaller feeding in the form of a snack sort of a couple hours prior, I think is a really good idea. And it kind of goes against the grain, because people are like, oh, I've got this dinner out tonight with my friends. Like I should just really cut my calories to sort of give myself more wiggle room, more space, whatever. And I really think that can backfire. And I actually think doing the opposite is setting you up for a greater level of success in that instance.
Yeah, it's like it's the similar to the classic example of like, you save calories for later in the day. You're always then going to be eating those calories later on. Like, oh, just in case I'm hungry later on. Like, well, you're going to be hungry later on if you skip this meal.
It's sort of like a control illusion. Sorry to cut you off, Tommy.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a control illusion. I like the word extrapolate Tommy used before, because this applies like a binge eating population, but even broader as well. It's like an illusion of control where you're, all right, I'm going to bank calories for later. I'm in control of my eating. I'm going to bank calories for later. I'm going to be fine later because I've saved all this room here. But then, and that sort of like reassures you here. But then like further along down the track, you don't realize the illusion until you are ravenous, until you're provided with all this yummy food in the social context, or even if you're just at home and you're absolutely ravenous, and then you end up, like you were saying before, you end up overshooting and having more than what you would have had if you just had a mindful snack in the afternoon anyway. So yeah, the analogy I like to use to people is an illusion of control. You're not actually controlling anything. It'll probably backfire later on and lose control.
Yeah, particularly on that idea of calorie banking and like having a sense of control around it. I think that discussion also needs to be married up with what's the purpose of your food. I almost exclusively see people calorie bank so they can eat a lot of really tasty food. And rarely is that food's purpose to make you feel full. Like often the food's purpose is to taste good. I've never seen anyone save a bunch of calories so they can squeeze in extra veggies after dinner. So I think it's probably worth asking the question of, hey, like, are you like, why don't we just have you feeling full or more full in relative terms? And then that way you can have that indulgence, but that indulgence is from a place of, I want to taste something sweet. I want to savor it. I want to enjoy the way it tastes and the way it feels in my mouth, as opposed to I'm eating a tub of ice cream after dinner because I'm really hungry. And I think that will make me feel full as well as have it taste really good.
Yeah.
Another point there,
yeah.
Tom.
You go.
Sorry, you go, Josh.
I was just going to say, like, very rarely, like, does a tub of ice cream, is it actually taste any better than, let's say, half a tub? You know, like you get to the point where it's like diminishing returns. It's like, I'd say, like, I talk about beer all the time. Like, you know, after 6 beers, they don't taste that good. Like, you know, there's a point of diminishing
The FN
returns.
sweet spot.
That's it. The FN sweet spot between your social and emotional health and your physical health as well.
Yeah, there's certainly a point of diminishing returns. And yeah, I think the other point to that, Tom, one thing that Tom sort of alluded to is, if you are super hungry coming into that tasty meal, you're probably going to eat it very fast, and you know, it's going to be gone in an instant. You're not really enjoying it. Like, you're just so like, oh my God, ice cream, like I've been waiting all week for this, like we're going to Messina and they've got this new special and it's going to be great, and you're like super excited, and then 2 minutes later it's gone and you're like, oh, I don't even remember what that tasted like. And like, that's not really fun. To me, if you want to enjoy an indulgence, it's like, take the connoisseur, like I'm a connoisseur approach, and just like, you know, go, yes, I get these notes, oh, good texture, and like you're really sort of tasting it. You're like, yes, like that's the way to enjoy an indulgence, not to freaking wolf it down, you know, because then you don't even get it. It's gone.
And I think like that can sound, I think some people recoil from that idea and think it sounds a little bit wanky. But something I've been doing recently for my more like type A data driven type clients is getting them to record how long eating it takes them, and then trying to get them to PB the duration of how long it takes, which sounds just absurd. But
that's awesome.
Well, but I think if you give someone 4 squares of chocolate, like, how many people are liable to eat that in under 20 seconds and just inhale it and then go back to the cupboard or the fridge, depending on how you swing, for more? Alternatively, though, if you say, hey, like, let's try and stretch this out. Let's chew this as much as possible. Let's pause in between. Let's like put it down, take a breath, not be distracted. All of a sudden, people can start to see like a visible return, and that also like incentivizes that behavior.
I really like that. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but people who, especially like you said at the start, Mac, like people who have this perception that snacking is bad. I need to cut down on my snacking. I snack too much, all this sort of thing. And that applies as well to certain kinds of food, like the dichotomizing foods. I feel like in some people, they're wolfing down quote unquote yummy foods, not only because they're starving, because they have this somewhere in their psyche, like, I'm not allowed to have this. I'm not going to be able to have this again for a long time. So they lose control because they're just so excited to eat it. But it kind of doesn't make sense if they truly weren't allowed to have it again, they'd be savoring it, right? So it kind of doesn't make sense to me how they're woofing it down with this meal. I tell you, I have to make the most of it right now because I'm not going to be able to have this again. I feel like once hunger is controlled for and I've had a snack, then you need to work on the moral neutrality approach to food where they understand that have the connoisseur approach and enjoy their Messina, let's say, but reassured that they're going to be able to have that again. They want to savor it and make the most of this experience now, but they don't need to go over, quote unquote, overboard because they're going to be able to have Messina again. They're going to be able to have chocolate again. That experience will come again. So I feel like people reassuring themselves that there's nothing morally wrong or naughty with having certain things and that they're going to be able to have this again in future. So they don't need to panic and take a scarcity approach to it, if you like.
Yeah, and tacking onto that, I think the idea of like that abundance mindset, right? Of like there is plenty of chocolate, there's plenty of ice cream I can eat is a really big one. Something I've spoken to Mac about is that idea of do you make your diet as bland as possible versus like sprinkling in some tasty food and some indulgences on a more consistent basis. And I think part of that, right, is can you plan for or make an indulgence a thing you're doing not super often, like there's a sweet spot, but if that's the thing you do relatively often, all of a sudden not overindulging becomes way easier because you can tell yourself, hey, like this is a thing I get to do every day, every second day. This isn't a thing where I need to wait another 4 weeks before I get to taste anything remotely tasty again.
Yeah, and it's also then like part of the plan. Like, not that we do plans, but people love to have a plan or be on a plan or off a plan or whatever it is. But when you have a plan to have an indulgence, it's not, you're not doing anything wrong. I think that's, again, going back to that neutrality. It's not having the dichotomous way of thinking or approaching food as well. I think if we can kind of look at some common traits of when snacking goes wrong, it seems to be when there's not much routine or structure to it. There's not much purpose, and it's mindless. So if we then look at the ways we can improve snacking, it's when there's purpose, when you do it mindfully, and perhaps even if there's a bit of structure and routine and it's planned.
Yeah, I think it would be fair for us to also talk about the cons. The cons of snacking and like why an anti-snacking approach might be desirable, like rather than just giving the whole argument, oh, snacking is great and it's good. I think one of the biggest cons of snacking is that it's like the practical burden. It's more instances where you're going to eat in a day. Therefore, you've got to think more about like food. You've got to think more about food. You've got to think, well, what am I going to have? And it just creates more opportunity to, I guess, I don't want to use the term slip up because it's like a little bit dichotomous, but I'm just going to say it because I can't think of it out loud. It creates more opportunity to slip up. And it can also, if the whole approach to the nutrition is too difficult, especially if someone's busy and stressed or their priorities are elsewhere, then it can be difficult for someone to, after slipping up, feel like they've failed and then kind of throw in the towel and not really try at all. So I think there's a lot of rationale to being like, this is a clear cut feeding. This is when I eat and this is when I not eat. Because if you're really pro snacking and snacking is like really, really emphasized, you can find that between main meals, there could be this gray zone of, oh, snacking could always be a thing and food is always sort of on my mind. And therefore, when an opportunity presents itself to consume a snack, it's probably going to be consumed. Whereas if you're more someone who's like, the light switch is off sort of thing, I'm not snacking now, I'm not thinking about food, I'm doing other things at this point. And, in 3 hours from now, when it's dinner time, that's when food comes back into the mix. I think that, that can be a more desirable approach in some instances. So, I think it is really a sweet spot. And yes, we do want to practice snacks in a sort of planned, routine type perspective. But doing that can be difficult for some people. So in those instances, like kind of pulling back the snacking emphasis, I think has a place.
Yeah, and I guess like the meta of that discussion, right, Mac, is we're not here sort of going, are snacks good or bad? But I think we have to ask, what are we actually trying to achieve? And then using your own personal experiment and your own experiences, how do we manipulate this variable so that it takes you towards your goal in a relatively productive way. Because like some people find having a lot of frequent snacks actually just kills any sense of hunger and they feel full all the time. But other people find that just exacerbates that hunger signal. They get way more food focused. So I guess we've got to start with like the question of what do we want to get out of the snack? Where does it fit into that paradigm in our current set of goals? And then how do we manipulate that variable as like an external thing to help drive us there easier?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it just keeps driving back to the purpose, like of that meal, like, so maybe for the next 3 hours, for example, but also your overall goals. So I think another area where I see people go wrong is that if they don't understand, I think that I'll just use the health halo, for example, right? And obviously nuts are fantastic, but when I was a teacher, I would see people in a staff meeting just snacking on handfuls of nuts all the time. Like, why aren't I losing weight? I'm like, because you've just eaten 5 handfuls of fucking cashews. That's why. Like, they're not bad, but they're, in that portion, it's like fucking 3 meals worth. So when people don't really understand the calorie density of foods, they might think something's healthy. Like, oh, I'm having a healthy snack, but that may be enough for a meal. So that person, if they want to satisfy hunger, why not actually have a small meal that's still based on protein and plants, perhaps?
I think that's a really good point, Josh. But then I guess the counter argument to that would be that a small meal typically requires a lot more effort. Like if you're having a protein and plants meal, there's often, but not always, obviously, going to be some element of cooking or at least like preparation. Whereas when we think snacks, like personally for me, I emphasize protein and plants much less with snacks. I'm like, okay, protein and plants with main meals, great. Like that's kind of my go-to recommendation. But with snacks, I'm like, oh, if it was just protein or, just plants, so like say piece of fruit, for example, or just whole grains or something like that, then, I'm really cool about it. I think for a calorie conscious goal, as long as the snack itself is calorie conscious in that it's, relatively low calorie per bite and, or, it's got a decent chunk of fiber, then I think, it's fine. And I guess that would just be another perspective there on that one, probably.
Yeah.
I feel like I think we probably didn't do that well in retrospect, is like define snacks versus meals on a compositional basis. Like Max said, I think often we consider a meal as like an amalgamation of a whole bunch of things, but the snack is often like 1 or 2 components.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Tom, actually. I like that.
I don't have anything productive further to say on that. I just thought it was interesting. When Mac talked about it, I was like, oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, Tom.
Yeah, less effort, maybe 1 or 2 things in there. Like you said, it could be fruit, or it could be yogurt and fruit, or it could be like a piece of toast, like for example, something that kind of fills the gap, satisfies the hunger until your next meal. So if we look at purpose being satisfying hunger, I think we need to pick something that's going to actually satisfy the hunger, and that's where plants, whole grains, protein, they come in really handy. So let's maybe go around and share like what are some ideas for people for snacks that are actually going to satisfy hunger, if that's the purpose.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with calorie conscious goal. So as I mentioned, the traits you're looking for are a bit of fiber and relatively conscious of sort of calorie density. So go to like, piece of fruit or, a portion of fruit. I think that's one of the most underrated snacks in the world. It's high in fiber, it's low calorie per bite, it's super nutrient dense, it's convenient and zero cook, it's sweet and delicious, like amazing. But it's small. So if you need something a little bit more substantial, you could add in a source of protein like low fat yogurt could be a good idea. Then, you could take it to another step and you've got things like cottage cheese with Vita Wheats. You've got cottage cheese with veggie sticks. But I think like for a calorie conscious goal, there aren't too many options that I feel tick the boxes really, really well. But then if your goal is more like maintenance or performance, or even if you've got to eat a lot of calories, then the kind of the scope of options kind of I feel really expands. And for athletes, it's kind of like, oh, we can start looking at things like peanut butter on toast, or peanut butter bagels, or Vegemite on Vita Wheats, or Uncle Toby oat slices, or even Nutrigrain bars for like those really higher energy demand type individuals. And then obviously you have things like smoothies and stuff. But yeah, so I guess that should be enough to get things started. You guys can kind of give your...
Yeah, I think you...
I don't know if you
did a
guys
pretty
have
good job there.
seen... I don't know if you guys have seen... do you follow Dietitian Rose on Instagram?
Yeah.
Dietitian Rose, yeah. She posted, like, I don't know when you saw it a few weeks ago. There was like, I'll just brought it up now. It was like an infographic with like 36 different snack options. Mac, and like photos of like literally every single one of them. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, nice.
So there's that times 3. Mac covered a lot of them just then off the top of his head because he's fucking nutrition expert right here. It was amazing, man. But because I struggle sometimes, like when someone says, what are some snacks I can have? I'm like, there's like 95 different things running through my head that I'm trying to consider before I give a snack recommendation. Like you're saying, is obviously you got to consider who the person is in front of you. You got to consider practical elements. You got to consider performance goals if they've got those. Like there's just so many different things. And this comes back to when we're trying to define what a snack is. I'm like, well, I could recommend literally like any food to you. Like there's so many different things, but when the person just wants like a straightforward answer, obviously Mac just covered most of them then, but these infographics made by Dietitian Rose is like, covers most of the things that I'd recommend. And it like covers some performance, I guess, appropriate options. It covers some general like office worker appropriate options. A lot of them are pretty practically burdenless. If you ask me, it's pretty easy for most of them. So I can flick them through to you. I'll go into an Instagram page, and it's just, it's helped me so much with client recommendations. There's 36 options there.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, Tom?
Yeah, the only thing I really want to add on what Mac and Alex has said there is I like to establish like a schema, or like this is what a snack could look like. So like say use the fruit example or use the protein shake example, because they're both both can be calorie conscious and they can both do a good job like managing some hunger. But then you can teach people to turn the dial on that. If you're going from a period of dieting and you're returning to maintenance, or you're going to a slight surplus, or your energy needs increase, you can just like make an addition or change that subtly. And all of a sudden that snack is capable of ticking more boxes. So like you might start by having an apple and a protein shake with water. And then that becomes like an apple and a protein shake where maybe you put some peanut butter in it, maybe you put some oats in it even, if you've got a blender available, or even just something like milk. So all of a sudden you develop that skill base, you also develop it flexibly, and you have the ability to make changes as dependent on your particular context in that period of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, having a toolkit for your snacks of like, okay, if I'm hungry, here's one. If I'm training, here's one. If I feel like a semi-indulgence, here's a portion control one. Like packet of chips is 100 calories. Like, yeah, it's not the most health conscious thing, but sometimes someone wants a savory snack. If it's 100 calories, it's classed as their indulgence for the day. Add some fruit or some veggie sticks on the side. Like it's gonna tick the boxes as well. So I think for the people out there that are watching, listening, thinking about your purpose, why you're having a snack, why do you want a snack, having a bit of structure into it, having a bit of a plan, and having some options available for you to build on is probably some of the key messages we've got from today. All right, legends, that's it. We're 30 minutes. Time to wrap it up. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks
Bloody
for joining.
oath.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Catch you later.